Hello and welcome back. I'm Dan, the Neuro Man May, and this is where we change the system. Episode 4, Growing Up Different. This podcast explores neurodivergence, identity, creativity, and the systems we try to function inside. So today, we are going back. No, not back to the future, back to school. Yep, that place where group work somehow meant doing all the work yourself. And where being told to just focus somehow didn't come with instructions. When I think back to school, I remember feeling different. Not dramatically different, just slightly out of sync. It was like everyone else had the manual and mine just got lost in the post. Classrooms themselves were loud, busy, unpredictable. And while others seemed fine, I was trying to process everything at once. Then there were the social rules: when to speak, when to stay quiet. When something was funny, and when it definitely wasn't. See, no one ever told me the rules had changed. I was just expected to know. And this is something that I make reference to in my book, Neuro Man, My AUDHD Journey. The fact that picking up on other people's feelings was never easy for me, even as a child. Even as a 38-year-old man, I struggle even now to determine and interpret the actions and intentions of other people. Now, for neurotypical people, this kind of thing is natural. They can just do it. They learn, they adapt. They're able to pick up the right signals. And yet, for neurodivergent people like myself, it feels like decoding a secret language. And sometimes, if not often, I got the translation slightly wrong. Looking back now, I realise something. I realise that a lot of what gets labelled as lack of effort is actually overload. You know, that feeling of trying to concentrate in the noise, trying to follow instructions while processing everything else. It's not that nothing is happening. It's actually that too much is happening. You know, the littlest of details in the room, you know, the noise at the window, other people in the room, the coughing, the fiddling of pens and pencils, the foot tapping, the slamming of doors, trying to focus on what the teacher is saying at the same time, whilst at the same time trying to process everything all at once. Something which, as a neurodivergent person, we know is very difficult. Now, as neurodivergent adults, we all start to look back and start connecting the dots. And when we start to look back, we look at those particular moments, you know, those moments that once felt confusing to us. they suddenly start to make sense. And it's only then that you realize that maybe you weren't the problem, that maybe the environment just wasn't designed for you. And this is something that has followed me from my childhood into my adult life. The fact that school life, mainstream school, was not the right environment for me. College was not the right environment for me. University, to an extent, was not the right environment for me, although it did allow me to practice my passion, which was performing arts at the time. And the numerous amount of jobs that I've had during my adult life have all presented me with an environment not designed for me. But one of the reasons for that as well is not having a diagnosis of anything. Going through those periods in my life thinking that I was the problem. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm being too difficult. Maybe I need to be more resilient. Maybe I need to be more patient. Maybe I need to give others the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I do need to learn to adapt. But when there are other people going to adapt for me, or for us as the neurodivergents. And it's funny because the other day I was scrolling on Facebook, and I'm a member of an English literature page, and someone had posted a rather beautiful animation of George Orwell's novel Animal Farm, which you'll all know very well. And to me, it represents the neurodivergence versus the neurotypicals, the animals versus the humans. And that interesting quote from the book, not all animals are treated the same, not all animals are equal. So, am I saying that neurodivergent people are animals? Of course not. All I'm saying is that George Orwell connected into the collective art of our conscious and saw things that other people didn't see, things that could happen, their relevance, their importance years later. Now, I feel that this is relevant because it talks about equality, order, diplomacy, society, all the important integral things that make us all fit in. And hopefully, one day, there will be a time when neurodivergent people are accepted. That we don't have to feel growing up different. That our outlook on life will be completely different. Because growing up doesn't mean growing up broken, folks, yeah? And I think that this is the feeling that all neurodivergent people have, that we're broken. That there's something wrong. That we need repairing. But it's not our fault, folks. And I can remember having conversations with my mum about the same thing, because she would blame herself. She would say, I've got, because I have a younger brother as well who's got his own learning difficulties. And she would often blame herself and say, I've got two sons with mental health problems, neurological problems, learning difficulties. Basically, what did I do to deserve this? And the truth is, she did nothing wrong. She's done everything that a parent should do, which is to love and look after their children, to protect them. And that's the important thing, folks. That's what your parents are there for, and never take them for granted. Now, going back to my earlier statement, growing up different doesn't mean growing up broken, okay? What it means is growing up in a system that didn't understand you yet, which is why it's important for us to educate neurotypical people to help them understand that our brains are completely wired differently to theirs. It's a different way of thinking. We're not aliens, we're not monsters, we're not something to be feared. We're something that needs supporting. Really, we need to be loved. We need that attention and that tender loving care. Certain things I would come across growing up, it was mostly a mixture of negative and positive. I had patient managers, I had impatient managers. Managers who would be quick to snap, managers who would get frustrated and upset because they didn't understand my way of thinking. And what made it harder was not having a diagnosis, as I've mentioned previously, because how can I explain to an employer something which I don't yet know myself? And I'm sure we've all been in similar situations to this, folks. We've all tried to justify ourselves, to try and understand ourselves better. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we get caught in a loop that it must be me. So what do? We job hop. We jump from job to job, thinking, well, this job didn't work out, but maybe the next one will. Then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. But sometimes that isn't always the case. And I've certainly found that in the amount of jobs that I've had over the years. How far do you, or how much do you keep going before you realize that it's time to give up? That it's time to really be in control of your own life, your own face, that you make it predictable. You try to think of ways to navigate around it. So what do? You either stay on benefits or you carry on suffering in a job that you absolutely despise until it leads to burnout. And this is why we have to change the system, folks, because the system does not work for neurodivergent people. It doesn't. I know that it doesn't because I'm a prime example. If it worked for someone like me, I'd still be in a job right now. I would still be progressing. I would be able to handle the pressure. And I would certainly be more resilient and feel better supported. And unless employers are willing to put in those adjustments that we so desperately need, it's not really fair to us, is it? If we're not going to be supported. That's the challenge, folks. Now, we've all tried to adapt, we've all tried to blend in, fit in. We've all tried to be someone else, essentially, which is what leads to masking. But as I mentioned in my book, there's only so much masking you can do before you forget who you are. And that's the challenge, isn't it, folks? But with this podcast, I hope you're learning a lot. I hope you're learning that you're not alone, that there's other neurodivergent people out there like myself who are advocating, who are hoping for better things to happen in the future, who want the system to change, who want different things, who want a better quality of life, really. Because I think that's also a key element that's missing, folks, that quality of life. And don't get me wrong, some neurodivergent people can have a good quality of life, but it depends on the level of the spectrum that they're on and the severity of their own difficulties. And this is where I think the system needs to learn to progress, not go backwards. Not back to the sort of the Dickensian era where, if you had any kind of difficulty, you were either put away in an asylum or institutionalized or paraded around the town with a bell on your neck. That's not, we don't want that for neurodivergent people. We don't want to be seen as the, if you'll pardon the expression, freaks of society. I want us to be seen as equals, not as gods, not as, you know, these great big looming reassuring figures, just like everybody else, just to be accepted, to be human, to feel what it means to be human. I think that's so important, folks. And I hope you all agree with me on that. I really do. Because we can't go through life dreading what our future is going to be every time we wake up in the morning. That growing up different is not good. That being different is never a good thing. Because otherwise, our mentality just won't sustain it. We're just going to be having negative attitudes. We're going to get very depressed, which will lead to horrible thoughts and will lead to terrible burnout. It's all adding up, folks. And this is what I'm trying to say. That even though I grew up different, I had to try and accept the fact as I've got older that growing up different wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, don't get me wrong, bad things did come along as a result of being different. It caused me to fall behind at school. It caused teachers to misunderstand me. It caused a lot of arguments with my parents. It cost me relationships, friends. It was very, very difficult. And I'm sure there's other neurodivergent listeners out there who have felt this one time or another. And am I saying that society owes us an apology? Maybe. But I think the most important thing with society is that it just needs to learn to adapt to us. As soon as it does that, there will be greater employment of neurodivergent people. There will be less mental health cases, less suicidal cases. We will all come together as one, as the song goes. Now, next week, we are going to be discussing neurodivergence in the workplace, which I've kind of touched upon already today, but I'm going to go into it into more detail next week. Okay? And talk about some of my own experiences, which I hope will help you. So, until next week, remember, neurodivergence is our superpower. I'm Dan, the Neuro Man May, and thank you for listening, folks.